Anybody can build an agent from their computer. I was able to read the stuff on Discord, find a platform to create my MVP, and then sell it from a laptop. We started problem first, and we started with the plumbing. Think about an iceberg. The thing that's visible represents a tenth of the thing that you're actually building. We didn't start by building that visible tenth. We began by building the hard plumbing that is all underwater, that's all invisible.
Welcome to the Control Alt GAB podcast, where we sit down with tech founders to break down how they scale, pivot, and grow. I'm your host, Gabrielle Walthers. Let's dive in. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Control Alt GAB podcast. Today, we are joined by the CEO of Agentiiv, Karla Congson, and we are so fortunate to have her on the show today. She's been speaking all over the place. I know that you've held all sorts of different positions over the course of your career. You're now in the CEO space with Agentiiv. You've won a ton of awards. You were a winner of the Women in Innovation 2025 Movers and Shakers. You were in Canada's Top 50 Women Over 50. You won the Women of Influence Entrepreneur Award, and you were a finalist for the Women in AI Entrepreneur of the Year. And that is a beautiful, shiny, a wonderful resume. We are so excited to have you today and to learn from you, Karla. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. It's a privilege to be here. I can't wait to start our discussion.
Awesome. So to kick things off, I'm really curious about the conception of Agentiiv and what, from your perspective as the current CEO, really what was the push for you? What was appealing about moving into this new space? Walk us through the origin story and what led you here.
No, that's a great question. I've always been a builder, but if you had asked me 3 years ago, would I be sitting here as a marketer, suddenly turn into an AI engineer, I probably would have laughed a little, right? Like that's the last thing that I thought I would have become. My background is actually in corporate. I'm a non-technical founder. I was a CMO of a couple of organizations, and I was an EVP of the group that ran the Ford of Canada business. And then I became an entrepreneur in 2016 and ran and continue to run like a really good and profitable services business. But suddenly in 2023, this little experimental chatbot called ChatGPT came into the public domain while people were looking at it and developing, images and poems and that sort of thing. I started to think, oh my gosh, what impact does it have on my services business? Because suddenly these little chatbots seem quite as smart as some of the people that I know. And I ended up going pretty deep into prompt engineering and understanding how does it work? How do you prompt it? How do you create a system prompt? What are these things called agents before it was every second word on LinkedIn that you read? And in 2023, I actually started to create agents before that was the most popular thing. What prompted that was just an incredible curiosity about this new technology that was just taking the world by storm and seemed to give us like incredible power in our hands. And really, it was a blend of curiosity, opportunity, and being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. The experiential point of view that you have there about talking to these chatbots can feel like you're truly just talking to a peer or a subject matter expert on whatever it is that you're talking to this chatbot about. And so what was that experience like? You mentioned you kind of dove into the agentic world early, and now it's a term that we're so familiar with now in the AI space, but that was not always the case. What was your experience with being early in the agentic space? Specifically, was there a lot of path making you had to do? Was there a lot of bugs to figure out, or was it, more just being able to play in the sandbox?
No, absolutely. Like back in 2023, there was still skepticism, right? But because when we think about AI back then, it was a very, very simple chatbot. No tools, no web browsing. The training data was maybe a year and a half old. So if you asked it something, the soonest data that it had was probably somewhere around 2022. It wasn't data and it couldn't access the internet. So I remember presenting in front of a few executives talking about baby AGI, which was one of the very first agents out there, and having a fairly skeptical machine learning PhD going, oh, this will never go anywhere. This will never build at scale. And so starting to build in the space, there really were no guideposts. There was no playbook. There was no rules. There was no book, no course that you could take that would help you build agents. And so we actually started to to build it the best that we can by joining forums and working groups and machine learning. So we were really building on untrodden territory with no playbooks. I always say, and I continue to say right now, building an AI is kind of like building and shifting sand. You need to have a vision. You need to have a point of view of what you're trying to create. You are putting together rules that are more obvious now that there's been more research, but anything can change at a moment's notice. I mean, it's funny, like being a builder in the space, it feels like decades can happen in the course of a couple of days with different launches. I guess the best way to describe it is you're out there forging a new frontier with no rules and no playbook. Lots of skeptics, lots of people saying about things can go wrong, but you need to build with structure first and knowing that you're trying to build something that you're trying to scale, not just for one person.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important piece that you brought up, where you have to build from the get-go, from, the ground up, with that scalability in mind. Process-wise, what are the complications with, leveraging LLMs like ChatGPT and Claude and all of these pieces as they evolve and change and, decisions are made about how they leverage data and how the user experience, looks and what new features are rolled out with different models and stuff like that? How has that impacted what Agentiiv does and how you guys are able to operate and pivot and scale? I can imagine the logistics and planning around how do we take into consideration how this can impact us and how we'll have to adopt and change. And what does that look like from your perspective?
Absolutely. So I think there's a few things that you need to consider, because like I said before, one of the big guys can launch a feature and all of a sudden 25% of the startup universe in that particular sector gets wiped out because the thing that they've been building has suddenly become a feature in OpenAI or Claude. Or to put it simply, and to take it down to the basic principles, I would say there are three things that you need to triangulate when you're building. And I take the lens of building for enterprise, not for consumer. So the first is, who are you building for and how do they act and what do they think? So for example, we build for an enterprise employee, and we need to understand that that employee isn't looking for a feature. They're looking to solve a problem, and they're not prompt engineers. So while you want to create the most powerful and amazing platform, simplicity needs to rule because you're working with individuals who have a preset way of working with software, and you need to understand how people work. So that's job number one. And you need to understand what that user needs and wants and how to fulfill that capability really quickly. The second thing that you need to consider is the IT people behind that user if you're building at scale. And what they care about is basically the rest of the iceberg that's beneath the water. So if the business user is looking for utility, ease of use, and their problem solved quickly, the IT and info risk group worry about 100 other different infrastructure things: authentication, observability, data retention, data sovereignty, data recency, evaluations, graceful error handling, all the stuff, right? That is actually 80% of where we spend our time is the really, really boring plumbing that the enterprise risk review committee and security people care about so that their data doesn't get lost or go into training or, God forbid, go somewhere where they can't control. Because at the end of the day, that's their IP. So a lot of time needs to be spent as a startup or a company building around that. And then the third, and you hinted at it, key area that you need to consider is LLMs aren't software. They're not binary. They are non-deterministic by nature. And so an input that you come in will not be the same output coming out. And how do you create some predictability so that it's actually answering the problem, but recognize the very nature of these LLMs are non-deterministic and unpredictable, right? Hallucinations can happen. So how do you build around that? But what's also been really key for us is being on top on how these models, and I'll speak to LLM specifically, change so rapidly. So if you consider for a sec, even just the raw intelligence, there's an organization that puts the state-of-the-art models through the Mensa Norway test. They basically take this test and the model through, typically the visual model, through all the numbers and see where they score. And then they take an average of the score. GPT-4o, which is what we knew as ChatGPT back in April 2023, had a 70 IQ point basis. The average human's about 100, so it wasn't as smart as your average Joe. It would have a hard time keeping up in meetings. Genius is 136 IQ points, and some say that Einstein is about 160. Fast forward to now, and the three most state-of-the-art models. So, for example, OpenAI's GPT 5.1, not the most recent one, scored 148 IQ points. That's a huge leap. It went from well below average in 1,000 days to suddenly exceeding genius levels and ready to outpace Einstein in terms of its IQ points. That's how quickly these things are going. And how you write prompts, system prompts change very significantly at each major jump of this reasoning capability. So you can't write your instructions once like software and expect it to act the same tomorrow when the underlying LLM just changes radically every few months.
Yeah, what a detailed response. That is so informative. I have no technical background at all. And so the only information I can gather myself is from my user experience. And so it's very interesting pulling behind the curtains and seeing really how much these actually changed, being able to quantify the effectiveness and the intelligence of these bots. And so I want to bring that piece into a big pillar of Agentiiv, which is being able to duplicate your high performers and your important subject matter experts. And so when we talk about the ChatGPTs and the Claudes and the Geminis of the world coming in with very impressive IQ markers being higher than what you'd consider a human genius, when we are implementing that level of intelligence into someone's duplicate, has there been any attitude of resistance and fear even from the person being duplicated, where what if this bot comes in smarter than me, able to outperform me in these areas and ultimately working me, the base person, out of a job or making me less effective by comparison or something like that? Is that something that you have interacted with yet? Is that only something that's existed in your mind? I'm just curious how that comes into play tangibly when you roll out AI the way you are in Agentiiv.
That's a really interesting question. So for those that haven't been duplicated or digital twinned, I haven't experienced skepticism, but I've read it. Increasingly, I see posts on LinkedIn saying, should we be personifying these or should they be tools and software? Should we be giving them names? Should we be having them act like people? And so there's an increasing fear response and skepticism to LLMs emulating personas when they're being delivered as agents. Let's park that for a second. We can talk about that separately. In speaking with our team and our individuals and the people who I've invited to become digital twins, there's actually been an embracing of it. And I'll give two separate stories. One is within our team members. So as I mentioned, I run two businesses. One is a services business where we have good old-fashioned humans and we do good old-fashioned consulting with fairly large companies, enterprise companies, and that sort of thing. So they'll come to us and we'll do a campaign or we'll do a consulting project or we'll do an HR project or something like that, right? With people. And so when I invited the first folks to come in and work with me to do this, many were actually really excited. And they range from young people, so people in their early 20s who were particularly good at a particular area, so it might be social media or social media strategy, to 60-year-olds who had spent a lifetime crafting their particular talent or their craft. And the reason they were really excited wasn't just that they would have a digital twin of them, although I'm sure there was an aspect of that's kind of neat to be able to create that. But it was the idea that they would have digital twins of the 100 other people that we were doing it. And what that means is suddenly they had 100 superpowers beyond the thing that they were capable of. As we get more senior, we become T-shaped talent. And I don't know if you've heard that term, but the concept of T-shape is we get a lot of skills, over a career, we get good at this, we get good at that. And we tend to be very good generalists with a bunch of, skills that we're good to average at. And then one or two things that we're exceptional at that we've spent our career honing. Well, imagine if suddenly as a generalist that you could actually be good at 7 or 8 or 10 or 20 different things because you would have a digital twin to compensate for those capabilities. And so that was what was attractive to our freelancers is because as an exchange for working with us to identify their workflows, and not only would they have the replica of them, but they would have access to 100 others that other teammates had created. So if they're freelancing, let's take a creative director, for example, right, who's really good at creating concepts or maybe brand names, suddenly they could do their own competitive research. They could do their own creative briefs. They could write their own proposals. They could create their own work back schedules. And suddenly their consulting practice, they were actually able to take some of the stuff that was administrative, or they would find other people to help them, but they could do a lot of that stuff and keep the income themselves. So our freelancers actually found their incomes and their margins rising because suddenly they had helpers that they couldn't previously afford, and they could take on projects that they previously couldn't afford to do. So it's actually risen all boats in our capability, in that I have more motivated teams who use this technology consistently to help with their output, always with human in the loop, but it's actually built their businesses and expanded their businesses beyond what they could do alone as an individual freelancer. So that's why it's been embraced in our side. One really exciting digital twin that we created was actually a real expert. He is one of the foremost leaders in foresight, which is scenario planning. He's a UNESCO chair, and he was the inventor of a modality called causal layered analysis. And it's a methodology that's well known in foresight and futures planning. He's written 3 books, and he's written 300 different papers, and he's got a double PhD in this capability. So he's a pretty smart guy. And what I love about Sohail was we built a digital twin of him. I spent 2 hours interviewing him, and we actually built a fairly complex digital twin. And we uploaded about 40 of his papers. So not only did it have his capacity and his process for causal layered analysis and, developing futures planning using his methodology, but it had access to 40 of his papers. And we've given him a copy of this as well. So he actually uses it for PhD students who want to interview with him. Because he has a lot of younger students, PhD students who want, 15 minutes, an hour of his time. But that adds up when it's, 30 people that want to have that discussion. These students are able to talk to it and get a fairly robust answer. And then they're very mindful and useful of his time. He even uses it to establish some of his own talks, presentations, and some of his keynotes as well. So that's one where at a 70-year-old PhD, foremost futurist, unbelievably excited about creating a twin of himself.
I like the framing that you presented when we engage in the public discourse about skeptics of AI integrations and the direction that's going versus people that are embracing it and understanding the opportunity. Ultimately, AI is able to expand the role that people are able to fill. It allows you to leverage, other subject matter experts with the twins and stuff like that. It really trickles into all of the different facets of the AI conversation. I want to talk a little bit about the scalability of this type of model with these twin agents. And so as you continue to grow and scale, and you onboard more clients and you make more twins and you also hire more people and they have more twins and all of this good stuff, how do you implement, checks and balances to make sure that these AI and these twins are performing well and that we're not getting that hallucinated data coming in? How do we avoid just perpetuating synthetic data where AI generated intel or information is informing the next product and entering that cycle? The conversation about scalability in AI is usually a very positive one, but I'm curious if that has presented a challenge for you at all.
It is, and it's something that we consider every day. So scaling in terms of adding new users is the easiest thing. That's just infrastructure, right? We've built on the Azure platform, and we're currently in migration into AWS. And by partnering with these technology cloud providers, you can be infinitely scalable. You're essentially just buying more compute and more database. However, as you scale beyond me as a prompt engineer, quality and predictability and reliability are core things. And that puts a point on 2 things that builders and users need to be cognizant about as we are both building and using this AI. One is observability and evals and quality control. So we take observability and evals very, very seriously and have systems in our infrastructure to check quality control, bias, quality of answers, verified links and citations, etc. So building in the right processes, LLMs as a judge, stages in the workflow so that the work is double checked to try to mitigate hallucinations when that's critical, i.e. when it's searching something, doing analysis and creating a report. So we build the capacity to do that. We also have an evaluation structure that does auto testing of all of our agents on a regular and planned basis daily. and at scale, so that we're seeing when things go wrong, when there are issues, when a run is created that you expect it to follow a workflow and it doesn't follow that particular workflow. So that's an automated evaluation and testing process that needs to be part of any agentic build. The other thing too is actually having a lot of human in the loop testers. So we have 100 people in our other company, consultants and freelancers, and these people are in our own development platform, and they are continually testing and providing feedback on our agents as we do things like switch from model to model, or launch new agents, or launch new frameworks, or new tools and capacities. Always including that human in the loop testing as part of your automated evals is critical. Quality testing, and bias testing is something that you need to work in. The other part that's actually important that we don't talk a lot about is critical thinking, because one risk, as we mentioned, is hallucinations or bad output. And, humans take that bad output and present it as their own, and they get in trouble. The other half that's actually the responsibility of the user and for organizations as they implement AI is ensuring that we're protecting critical thinking. We have just inherited the biggest easy button known to mankind, right? Which is ChatGPT. Write me a report on the American Revolution. And all of a sudden you have like a 40-page, seemingly well-researched report that you can hand in that sounds pretty good to the ear, right? And when you're tired, when you have a lot of work to do, when you have a lot on your plate, it's super easy to cut and paste output and present it as your own without double checking. And part of the risk there as users is you begin to lose your muscle for critical thinking. And so what we actually work into these agents, the way that they question users, the way that they offer next steps is almost a little bit of an argumentative part that forces the user to think critically what they're feeding into the agents and what they should do as a next step once they get their report. And that's something that I really reinforce with people. These agents are most useful when they augment us, when they help us relieve our capacity and enable us to take our output to the next level, as opposed to just give us a one and done report that we cut and paste into our PowerPoints.
Yeah, that intentionality is so important. You touched on something that I struggle with a lot, fearing that mental atrophy where, are we going to become just less literate, or our problem solving skills are going to be weaker, and our comprehension and all of those really important pieces that require practice to be upheld. We can't stop innovation. And I think that there's a lot of really positive innovations that are coming with AI. Now we're realizing the responsibility of developers and creators in this space to ensure that we're preserving the human experience and keeping people as effective and critical to the AI universe. And as AI develops, the average person is becoming more aware that these aren't completely autonomous things that you can set and forget and just run forever. That's just not the reality of the world that we're living in with AI right now. I appreciate that intention, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I think that's a place where a lot of that stigma comes from. Like, if I don't use my brain, what good is it going to do sitting in my skull? And I think that comes from fearing people being replaced and companies scaling, not hiring people and instead using these bots. But I think you did a beautiful job of highlighting through examples that is not the place we're at right now.
It comes down to our accountability, right? You see a lot of talk around, and you nailed it, right? Which is the risk of atrophy. Our brains are inherently lazy. If we give them a free pass to just copy and paste, that's going to be the muscle that they remember. And it's going to be harder and harder to think critically, to build and innovate. What makes us uniquely and valuably human, I think, are two critical facets. One is our creativity and our facility with imagination, right? To imagine what is not possible today, to what is not represented by patterns today, and to enable that to become real. So human creativity. And then the second part is human critical thinking. That sets us apart from the machines, but it is going to be our responsibility to continue to exercise those two muscles to make sure that they are working at top form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just so fast evolving and so many AI solutions popping up, on a day-to-day basis. It's easy for the consumer to see how quickly a lot of these processes with AI are developing, which I think does help. Like when it started evolving and really the snowball effect was happening, I think that led to a lot of people being like, this is taking over. But we're just seeing more examples and case studies that we can take a look at, more conversations like this that people can see that's ultimately not actually what's happening. Truly, how to make AI effective is exactly what you said, to allow it to increase the person's reach and allow them to be more effective and take on more work and have more revenue generating potential, which ultimately leads to more opportunities for the person. And I think that, you'd be hard pressed to find someone who would disagree with that. I do want to shift to, talking about that being in, an increasingly crowded space, lots of noise about AI, lots of companies that, offer different, sometimes similar solutions. From your perspective, what have you done with Agentiiv that has worked really well in allowing you to break through the noise and being able to get a lot of attention on what makes you guys unique, and how has that impacted customer acquisition and that top of funnel?
So I would say three things. Building agents, there's 100,000 people building agents. That is not white space or moat, right? Anybody can build an agent from their computer. I did when I started Agentiiv, right? As a non-technical person, I was able to read the stuff on Discord, find a platform to create my MVP, and then sell it. To see that it actually had product market fit from a laptop. I didn't require funding. I didn't require a supercomputer. I didn't require any GPUs. So anything is infinitely possible now with the tools that we have available, relatively free. What made a difference for us were a couple of things. One is we started problem first, and we started with the plumbing. Typically, when I see big announcements and big startups and big plans, people go for really sexy, large things that seem amazing. I'm going to build an agent that's going to intake everything from voice and automate your entire sales process. Well, good on you. Like, that's amazing, but can break in about 100 different places in there. And it's awesome if you're selling to a small business with guardrails and security protocols that don't require SOC 2 compliance or Canadian data residency. Rather than focusing on the interface first and then building the infrastructure up, think about think about an iceberg, right? What's above the water to business users, the thing that's visible represents a tenth of the thing that you're actually building. We didn't start by building that visible tenth. We began by building the hard plumbing that is all underwater, that's all invisible, and is super boring to the business user, but is mission critical to the IT and infrastructure group. So things like authentication, infrastructure, data residency, cloud architecture, all of that. We fashioned that first, made sure that it was built at an enterprise readiness capability, super invested in both the infrastructure and the talent to build that in a way that would be acceptable to organizations like Manulife or the TMX or NAV Canada, and then built the capability that was visible to the user and made sure the usage was possible. What that meant was it took a year to build. We weren't out and selling something within weeks. We could have, absolutely. Like, that was actually the easy part. But we knew we would get the interest of the buyer and then be shut down as soon as IT walked into the room, right?
Mhm.
So we actually built backwards, infrastructure and then interface. So that was our first thing. So enterprise grade was one core thing that set us apart. The second was problem first. And again, it's really easy. I see a lot of startups fall in love with their idea and stop listening to their user. We built based on decades of experience and relationships with clients, seeing what were their pain points. And the biggest pain point for a lot of marketers is just not enough capacity. Whether they have 20 people or 200 people in their organization, they're overworked. They don't have expertise in core areas, and they're overspending with external resources. And so what we set out was to equip them with an easy to use and familiar interface, which is talking to someone on Slack or text, in order to brief them for a particular task or exercise, and then receive that task in the format that they usually require if they briefed a freelancer, whether that's a PowerPoint or a mind map or a podcast, they received it as they would with a human talking to Slack. We solved their problems as opposed to navel gazed around the technology and the features. And then the third part was building agnostically and flexibly so that you weren't tied to a particular framework or a particular model or a particular approach because we knew that we were building and shifting sand from the beginning.
Yeah, kind of insulates you against that issue where you're ultimately relying on these factors that you truly have no control over. But if you build your model where you can theoretically plug and play with any model, any AI model, then that insulates you from if Claude goes haywire. It can ultimately be replaced with something that serves the function that you're looking to fill. Yeah.
Absolutely. You can switch the model or you can switch the infrastructure. I think what a lot of startups also miss is the importance of actually selling. They spend so much time building whatever that is, the infrastructure or the SaaS or the product feature set, and then they go to market and nobody's buying. When we began a POC, we actually partnered with our first 3 clients and we gave it away for 6 months. So we were on demo without collecting a dollar with them. But what that helped us understand is what were the problems that they needed solved. We co-created with them. We optimized it. My baby was ugly when it first launched. I look at it now and what we were doing, and it's a little bit embarrassing, right? But back then, our clients were really excited because it saved them 8 to 10 hours, and they were willing to deal with the bugs or the issues, and they gave us amazing feedback. That was invaluable when we began. So after the first 3 clients, we had 3 enterprise use cases. So when I went to our next 5 clients to say, hey, listen, this is what we're selling. We're enterprise grade. These 3 companies, including the TMX and Vector Institute, are on site and their existing clients. We were able to open a lot of doors. With those next 5 clients, which included airlines and insurance companies and nuclear facilities, we built our credibility with each tranche of regulated clients that we brought on. Right now, we've got 20 clients. And now that AI is sexy and everybody is building an agent and everybody's there saying, hey, will you buy our agent? We're not just saying, hey, will you buy our agent? We're saying, hey, we built an enterprise grade capability. These 20 enterprises have signed MSAs. We've passed the 6-month process of going through each of these companies' info security, regulatory risk perspective, and we have all of the audited compliance certifications that they all demand. We're invited to every door. Right? We've never not passed an info security review. And I think that's what's lacking in a lot of the organizations that are jumping to the agent space is they have an idea, they have a sketch, and they've got a demo. They don't have a production grade, fully fleshed out, proven infrastructure that they've spent the last 2 years bringing to market.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that touches on like a fallacy that we're seeing now, how easy it is to create these solutions powered by AI with a incorrect understanding that there isn't that need or that level of attention to be paid to that back end and making sure that you've built it in a way that it can't break 100 times and all of those pieces. And I think people don't really often scope in how important that work is to what they're doing on the sales and marketing side. Like
Yeah.
sales enablement starts with having something that will work consistently. And I think viewing those as 2 separate processes can get a lot of people in trouble.
There's a lot of PR around vibe coding, right? And vibe coding is amazing. Like tools like Cursor and Replit and all that are fantastic. It gets you to demo really quickly. It doesn't get you to production grade. At the speed or the depth that you need in order to be able to sell to enterprise. So
Yeah.
some of that stuff, you just have to do the work in order to build it. And yes, absolutely, AI-driven agentic systems can facilitate the speed of that, but it doesn't replace good old-fashioned engineering.
Yeah. I love that. What a good note to close this out on. Karla, I want to give you an opportunity before we wrap up here just to let folks at home know if there's anything new and exciting coming down the pipe and where to reach out for questions. Just make yourself as visible and accessible to folks as possible.
Oh, I love it. Thanks, Gabrielle. So we're really excited. So we have closed our 20th enterprise client, and we've actually closed with 2 of the largest insurance companies in Canada. So we've proven our market fit in the current framework that we've Scott. We have also become a strategic partner of Vector Institute, and we're working very closely with their machine learning engineers to take our product to the next level. So from a feature and functionality standpoint, the things that we're particularly excited about are orchestrated multi-agent systems. So right now, it's increasingly easy to create agents that work in production. Creating orchestrated systems that you have graceful error handling, much harder at production and enterprise grade. So that's some of the things that we're working on. Is it's almost like having an entire agency working for you as opposed to a freelancer on a particular project. So that's one thing we're excited about. We're actually expanding to Asia and the US to expand our global reach into those markets. So we're on our global expansion thread, and that's pretty exciting for us. If you send me a LinkedIn and friend or follow me on LinkedIn, that's usually where I announce where I'm going to be speaking at next.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Karla, for joining us here on the show. It was so incredible to learn from you and learn about just really where the future of agentic AI is headed.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you again so much for joining us. And for folks at home, be sure to check out Agentiiv, check out Karla on LinkedIn. And if you're curious about Freshly Pressed, you can check us out at freshly-pressed.ca. Thank you again, Karla, so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Control Alt Gab podcast. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you on the next one.